Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's last session. I hope previous didn't exhaust you too much and that you still have some energy for discussion. We have very interesting panelists tonight. On my right, Ambassador Richard A. Boucher, Deputy Secretary General of OECD. Then Mr. Peter Jungen. He has a lot of titles, but let me point out some of them. He is the president of European Enterprise Institute. He is also chairman of Peter Jungen Holding. He is an entrepreneur and angel investor. He is co-founder or founder of Business Angels Network in Germany, Europe, and China, and also New York. Then Mr. Andrea Castronova, president of BMW Group Central and Eastern Europe, who is also sponsor of Bled Strategic Forum, and Mr. Jan Mulfeit, chairman Europe Microsoft Corporation. So for start, maybe Ambassador Boucher, I would ask you for a short introduction words.
Okay, let me say a few words on top and try to talk about innovation and where it fits in sort of overall economic strategy now. We've got a lot of problems. We talked about turbulence, we talked about slow growth, no growth, possibility even of backsliding. We've talked a little bit already about structural reform. We've talked about just building confidence. I mean, the basic confidence that governments can do what's necessary to get us out of this, I think, is just lacking, and that's one of the key points of going forward. But as we go forward, we're going to have very tight budgets. We're going to have little stimulus, and we really need to set a sort of way of getting forward that means that we can get more bang for the buck, either by better investments, smarter investments, or by leveraging innovation and technology. If you think about problems like the healthcare, society is getting older, we're going to have more old people, healthcare is getting more expensive. We've got to figure out how to make these processes work better so we can afford to pay for my healthcare when I get old. So that you can afford to pay for my healthcare when I get old. When we've looked at innovation at the OECD, we found that there's as much economics, maybe more economics to it, than there is science and technology. You've got to have a competitive environment. You've got to get rid of the regulations that make it hard for entrepreneurs. There's got to be financing available at various stages beyond traditional financing. And it's all those market forces, those market opportunities that let innovation take place. And innovation being not just new gizmos and nano-info biotechnologies, but old firms using new technologies to become more competitive. Indian sort of frugal innovation where they're taking a lot of very expensive technologies and turning them into things that can go into a mass market in India, like the nano car or the $1,000 heart operation. So there's a lot of economics there. You add to that, to get real innovation, you add to that some investment in R&D, obviously public and private investment both. And then factors like government purchasing to pull technologies into the marketplace, protection of intellectual property so that people can benefit. But the foundation is a competitive economic environment and a regulatory simplification that means that markets are not as closed as they might have been. We've been looking at a lot of these factors and other things like the value of the intangibles. We're finding a lot of companies that invest more in intangible assets, in research results, brand, marketing, reputation, knowledge, software, invest more in that than they do in traditional capital projects. And that's a major source of growth going forward. There's some studies, for example, everybody knows that China's taking over all the manufacturing in the world, but there's some studies like of the iPod and the iPad. And one of the academic studies says the Chinese make about $10 off one of these things, about 2% of the value. 30%, 50%, sometimes more, goes to the brand holder and the people who make, design and manufacture, design and market the product. So that's where you want to be, and that's, I think, where the intangibles come in. Services trade opens it up. We're looking at value-added trade along with WTO to try to figure out how all these things pull together, but opening up services trade, developing a skilled workforce, these are things we're looking at too that are essential to be able to do that, to be able to create that value. One of the problems that's coming up, though, is inequality. Inequality not just in emerging markets, but in developed markets as well, where people with high skills are doing a whole lot better than people with lower skills. And part of the factor is globalization. There's social factors going into it. But we're looking very intensely at that. And we've got sort of economic studies, social studies, even tax people are looking at it now at OECD. And I think you'll hear a lot more from us over the next 6 months, not only about skills and technology, but also about the inequality and how to deal with that within our society. So it's an important area. We need the technology, we need the innovation, we need the market opportunities, but we also have to look at making sure it includes everybody.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Jungan.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very good to have you here. In 1976, there were 3 papers published in the world, I think, which really shaped the course of world economics and highlighted the beginning of the emergence of capitalism. Adam Smith, The Wealth, Thomas Paine, Common Sense, and the Declaration of Independence. And it was when capitalism began to emerge. Capitalism has one particular feature. The difference to other systems is not the invention part, it's the innovation part. You had great technologies in communist countries, but you had no innovation. What's the difference? So capitalism is unique in the, not in invention, but in the innovation part. You mentioned Apple. The market capitalization of Apple, as per yesterday, maybe it's changed today when the markets dropped again, the market capitalization of Apple yesterday was larger than the market capitalization of the 32 largest European banks together, just to give an idea on the pace of innovation and what happens in the world. Capitalism is about, indeed, about innovation, and innovation drives capitalism. It's the emergence of capitalism which made the difference. Everybody's talking about China. In the last 18 of the 20th centuries, China and Asia was always accounting for more than 50% of world GDP. There was only the difference of 200 years, where the difference is the emergence of capitalism and industrialization in the West, and China fell back. The Chinese have learned the lessons, and so we can bank on the fact market economies and capitalism will have a great future, if not in Europe, then in China, in India, in Brazil, and in other parts of the world. The last century was driven by terrific and terrible events, in particular in Europe, with the panics of 1970, the Great Depression, stagflation, the 87 crash, the 1997 Asian crisis. We had a century of regulation, a century of mismanaged monetary and fiscal policy and protectionism. But at the same time, this was the century of amazing technology-driven innovation. And it's very fitting that we now celebrate this year exactly 100 years when Schumpeter published the theory, his most famous book, The Theory of Economic Development. What he was basically talking about, what drives the dynamism of the dynamics of economic development in a capitalist system. And he was the first to detect this is the role of the entrepreneur. Actually, 20 years ago, just to remind ourselves in August, Timothy Berners-Lee invented, if I say so, the World Wide Web. What has that changed our life? And everybody, most people can't imagine that there was a life before the web. And young kids who have grown up with this take this, of course, for granted. Marx thought and proclaimed that profits coming from exploitation. Since Schumpeter, we know profits come from innovation. And I think that's the key to understand that entrepreneurs in that role are the only sort of institution who are driving innovation. Schumpeter used the phrase of the creative destruction, and I think that is something we see in this, in that very dynamic innovation process. If we understand with Schumpeter that economics is an evolutionary process and not an event which is dominated by mathematical models, then finally this has been proven in the crisis with the end of the rational expectation and the market equilibrium hypothesis, which finally came to a close. And since the end of communism, 42 million jobs were created in the world each year. Of course, we lost some in the crisis, but this is more than 800 million. So the only way for Europe out of this crisis is through innovation. And innovation is only possible through entrepreneurship. It's startups which give the economy its vitality. It's not government, and it's not government institutions. There's no way they can do that. And with all the problems in the US, the US economy is still much more dynamic than the European economy. The number of startups is still about 2 to 2.5 times as large in relation to GDP than in Europe. So a market economy or capitalism driven by innovation is about what? Ideas, new ideas, competition, entrepreneurship, new firms, entrepreneurs, founders, risk-taking investors, business angels, and so on. And here is where Europe is really lagging behind. Our largest untapped reserve in the demography we're having is a woman entrepreneurship, so I encourage very much women does it. Europe needs another 6 million entrepreneurs if they want to solve their problem, and this goes even more since the recent crisis, and people now talking about post-crisis. I think we are in the middle of a crisis, and maybe we'll get in a larger crisis than we had 2 years ago, where the new subprime is obviously is public debt. The financing was mentioned. Financing of innovation is the key, and the financing is not bank financing, it's equity financing, is the venture capital, is the informal venture capital market, the angel venture capital market, and later stage financing. Where is the next Google will be invented? It's whenever you ask experts in the world, they wouldn't say it's in Europe. It's either the United States or in India or in China. And therefore, it's so important that we understand this for Europe to get out of the crisis is this only way. Why in particular? The demography in Europe is very bad. We're getting to see in a situation where Europe is going to be, the world economy is going to be divided in 2 large groups. One is fast-growing, low debt, good demography. The other one is low growth, high debt, bad demography. Unfortunately, Europe is in the latter one. The US and China are both in between in terms of democracy. 60% of all young people under 18 years today are living in India. So the forecast is very easy that probably in 10 years down the road, 80% or more of the world's startups will come from Asia, which basically means Asia is going back in the position which I had for the last 18 centuries or out of this 20th century. And therefore, we have to understand that the first time in our history, Europe is not taking part in the breakthrough technologies of our time. That's the ICT industry. There's one firm in Europe, SAP, everybody knows this, and that's it. And that is going to create a huge gap with other parts of the world, which may grow much faster. And unfortunately, I think what the figures will show us that in a couple of weeks or months, we'll see that in Europe we're almost going to, in Eurozone in particular, if there will be growth at all, less than 1%. Let me add one thing mentioned on inequality. Now, all new jobs in the US being created, a net growth of new jobs in the United States in the last 20 years have been created by firms who have been founded less than 5 years ahead of entering in those employment contracts. So this is where also a social problem will be answered for, and therefore we still have in the world a very wide gap between Europe and the United States. The US account for 5% of world population, about 20 or 21% of world GDP, 40% of R&D spending, 75% of venture capital in the world, and 90% plus of angel investment is the early stage. The numbers for Europe is about 6% of world population, maybe 20% of GDP, 26% of R&D, less than 10% of venture capital compared to 75, and maybe 1 to 2 or 2% of angel investment. So the real gap is not the present growth rate, is not the present employment rate, is the financing of innovation, which will come down in a couple of years' time. Let me come to close and say that in the United States, it's venture-backed firms which account now for 21% of the GDP of the US. All net growth came from venture-backed firms, 12 million jobs in that, and the whole employment growth, as I mentioned before, in that. The World Bank study, Doing Business, very interesting stuff, and I only can read this, shows where we have a major problem in building up problems for young people to start a business, and we shouldn't do that. So I think the only answer for this, the only one is for us, is to come up with sort of a youth protection law, which means apply to young firms. We don't have to protect them against competition, but to protect them against politics and against bureaucracy, for at least for the first 5 years in their life. And if you ask entrepreneurs today, what is the most important thing governments can do for that, and they have only one choice, I'm sure that 90%, 95% plus of all entrepreneurs would say, just leave us alone. Thank you.
Mr. Castronovo.
Well, from the BMW Group, we try to be left alone. And how can I say, for us, innovation is not everything. It's the only thing. And this since the company has been founded a few years ago. As a matter of fact, in the BMW Group, ever since, innovation has driven growth. And innovation for us means two things. One, that you read under our logo, is sheer driving pleasure. And the second one, more recently installed, it is sustainability. Now, I'm proud to say that just a couple of days ago, we have been awarded for the 7th time in a row the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And that is quite important because if you take a look at our balance sheet and financial statements, it says one very important thing. Sustainability does not conflict with profit generation and investment in research and development. And that's what keeps us going forward. Let me just give you a couple of examples. First one is our technology and efficient dynamics. You all know that EU in particular, but US as well, and generally worldwide, there is a growing concern about emissions. Now, first distinction, emission is not pollution. A car today pollutes 100 times less versus a car that was produced in the 1970s. Concerning consumption, on the contrary, CO2 and the global warming of the planet, that is a different story. And for us, in the BMW Group, since 2007, we have installed in our cars, free of charge for the customers, technologies that allow us to save 20% of the fuel and, in parallel, increase the power output of around about 20% in our cars. That is the first step. Second step, you will see it shortly in next week, basically, where we will show two very important prototypes belonging to the BMW i, as we say, born electric. Cars that for the first time do not derive from a traditional combustion engine and then we plug in some batteries and electric engines, but they are thought from the beginning for being electric. And this brings along all sorts of important things like zero-emission vehicles, yes. Brings along innovation in different technologies because for the first time we are using extensively in the car manufacturing carbon fiber reinforced plastics. We're using new technologies for the batteries and plenty of new things that will help us even further create the lead against competition and creating value for our shareholders. So all in all, and to keep it short, the first message tonight is innovation is dramatically important for our company. Innovation goes along with profit and value creation for all stakeholders, not only the stock exchange, but as well as the employees and people working around the car manufacturing industry. And the last point, which I think is a message appropriate for this audience, is we car manufacturers, and in particular BMW Group, we are ready for a sustainable mobility of the future. Nevertheless, we do need the support of all the government and the politicians in order to have two things happening. The first one is that we would need a clear set of regulations in order to better invest our money in the things that are really important for the future. And the second thing is that if ever Europe or some other parts of the world would like to move faster to electric mobility, we will need a major shift into the energy policy of the single countries, making electricity available not only in a different way nearby the cars, but above all in a cleaner way. Because do not forget, if the car fully electric has zero emission, some emissions are produced in order to produce and distribute the energy. And within Europe, the experts say that CO2 production per kilometer may vary between above 100 down to 15 or 25 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And I think in this, Slovenia is one of the leading countries in Europe. So thanks to Slovenia.
Thank you. Mr. Murfight.
Well, very good evening. And now to be complementary to the, other speakers, because I'm the software engineer, so I'll talk a little bit how technology and the relationship between human beings and technology will shape innovation in society. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be 50 next year. I was born in 1962. In 1962, you could buy one transistor for $1. Today, you can buy for $1 1 billion transistors. Why I'm saying that? Because this technology is driven by exponential. And there's a huge difference between one step in a linear way as opposed to one step in exponential way. This technology, in combination with the trend that this is for first time in the human history, when the young generation understands and uses technology in much better way than the current generation, will significantly change society, everything, politics, economy, and so on. Facebook is the third biggest country in the world today, which was built because of the technology in less than 10 years. It's 750 million people connected, right? If you look, what will be the impact of this, technology on, society or on the competitiveness, and I will use example from, the car business. We will not change necessarily what will be done in economies, but we will change significantly how things will be done. If you take cars like BMW, 60–70% of the budget today is software, it's high-tech, right? So, and if you take the economical miracle of Germany, it's driven by that. It's Germany bet on what I would call re-industrialization, basically. They took, their strengths, they very much, strength was the car industry, and they apply new technology on that. While some other countries, I would name, bet on financial services and consumption, and that's why we have a huge difference, in Europe. And this phenomena, what versus how, will, stay. I don't think that we should, in Europe, invent the wheel. We should still base our competitiveness on the strengths and apply the new models. The next point I would like to mention, which I call digital paradox. More technology you will have in a society, human brains and human talent will be more important. Imagine, in old Greek, the Greek philosophers compare human beings to the animals. Today, we all are, compared to the technologies. And today, computers and technology is better in logic than the human beings. Today, computers are beating best chess players. So you can compete mainly through creativity and innovation, because technology will become hugely available and it will be commodity. That's why education and innovation process together with technology is key. And that's to follow what Peter said. If you look in Europe, if you take just the PISA study, which is the OECD study, that's measuring mathematics, reading, and science skills, 15, 16 years old students. Usually it's like Finland, Korea, scoring very high. Last year, for the first time, there were students from Shanghai in that, comparison, and they were beating best students from Korea and from Finland, 30 points in each and every category, which is like 1 year ahead. I think we in Europe live still in illusion that China is a cheap hands and maybe India is like services hub. But ladies and gentlemen, the world is changing, and I guarantee you, right, today is what, 9th of September 2011. In 10 years from now, in 10 best universities, you will have at least 2 Chinese universities in that, score, right? So we need to speed up. Last data point I would like to mention, again, to be complementary what was said by Peter. I think we are missing the startup mentality in Europe. We don't have anymore the startup, mentality and thinking. If the kids are going in the kindergarten in Europe, they would like to be entrepreneurs or innovators. 97% of the kids would like to do it. If they are leaving universities, it's only 17%, and only 4% will do it, in fact, right? So we are basically killing the entrepreneurship spirit, if you will. So we need to change the educational system from scratch, because if you would be, frozen in Europe 200 years ago, in school, you would not probably, well, there is probably center heating, that's the only thing which changed. But other than that, the system didn't change, right? We really need to, speed up that process and do it, differently. Because, and that's the last point, this old saying, you tell them, they will forget. You show them, they will understand. You show them, they will remember. You involve them, they will understand. It's really about project-based learning. That's what technology can deliver, right? And last point I would like to mention, the global connectivity means global competition. This is first generation of the kids and students in Europe, which will compete for the jobs globally. So we need definitely speed up. We need to solve, I would call, 3D challenge. Depth, we need to fix that, demography, which is, aging and so on. But we need to have also economical drive, the drive for the growth. That's the third, D. And I think politicians are talking a lot about depth, a little bit about demography, but very little about drive for the growth, how we will, compete in the future. That's how I would conclude. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mulfeit. Before we continue, I would like to remind you that debate is open to you, so do not hesitate to... Okay, we already have the first one. Yes?
Thank you. Christian Werschitz, Austrian Television. I'm taking part in such discussions very often, and I have simply one question. During the last 2 or 3 years, I'm hearing from different entrepreneurs all the time the same message. And it's true, and even it becomes more true. But how do you see then your personal relationship with politicians? Because obviously they do not listen to you, or at least in Europe, because we are heard that the crisis is even becoming deeper. So how this connection between entrepreneurs or highly evaluated companies and the politicians are in Germany or in Europe? Do they listen to politicians? Do you listen to you, or are they simply not able to implement what you are suggesting?
This is maybe for you, Mr. Mulfeit, or Mr. Castronova.
Okay, so I tell you what is my strategy. I don't know whether it will be successful or not. So I try to engage as much as I can with European commissioners, European politicians, but I think today the major issue of democracy is following. There's a gap between what we know and what we do. We need to do reforms like healthcare, pensional, educational reform, but because it's not fitting in the political cycles, right? Politicians, they do like 2 years, work, and then campaigning basically is overlapping with the work, right? So it is tough, and I can understand it, but we need to make a progress. The other thing is going from bottom up, because you have heard this afternoon that all of those social networks, they've got a lot of power. So what I started to do, I started to coach new young companies, the startups, which hopefully will have some effect, right? So this is kind of the 2 parts of that. But I think we need to move fast, because we are talking, but the action is very, very slow in Europe, and kind of have consensus. If you think about education, which I think if there's one thing Europe should do, it's education, right? Take just one thing. Take Korea, where Korea was 15, 20 years ago. Would you buy Korean TV? Me not, you know, like. But today I replace all Sony by Samsung because they bet on education, and today it's absolutely mantra for the whole country. That's what we need to do in Europe.
Yes, Mr. Ungan.
Very briefly on this. I still talk to a lot of politicians, although I came to the conclusion it doesn't make, to a large extent, is a waste of time. Why? They're so preoccupied to fight the battles of the last war, and if you see what happens in Europe now, I predict this is the last 10 years, at least a decade for Europe, what we're seeing. What are we doing now? We're talking about solving and rescuing Greeks, but basically, all of Europe is up to here in debt, and the Greeks is more in debt than others. What is that? This is the end of the post-Keynesian voodoo economic deficit spending, which Europe loved for the last 40, 50 years. And now they're coming to the conclusion that the European social model was not European, it was not social, and was not a model for anyone in the world, because it cannot be funded. And to continue a policy which basically said we ever spend more money and increase our debts in keeping our people quiet, it has come to an end. We have made the people working. And that's, I think, is the key understanding what John said about education. If you look at our numbers, 1/7 of our population have no formal education. Only 1/3, compared to the years of 40, have a university degree. If you go on patents, I mean, this is incredible numbers where you see, and this is the real problems in Europe. It is not the debt is just an end of it. But if you look, Czech Republic is doing incredible good in terms of completed high school. 90% of people do it. In the US it's 88, in Germany 85. But then comes the hard part. In Spain it's 51, in Portugal it's 28. You can go through patent regimes. And here you see what the best is in the world is, of course, Korea is Taiwan, with about 200 or 300 patents per inhabitants. But if you then go to Europe and look at this, the US is about 850, Germany is about 1,200. But then comes the hard part. If you go in the European countries like Spain, one patent for 15,000 inhabitants. Greece, one patent for 20,200 inhabitants. Portugal, one patent for 31,400. These are the problems we are having in Europe. And our politicians, they all know this. There's nothing we know they do not know or could not know. This is all public, available information. We have no secret access to any information, and we have no cooked up numbers. They can all read these numbers. And if that is the case, then you can understand my first sentence. To talking to a lot of politicians is a waste of time, because they know all the information, but they tell us you cannot do this now, you cannot do it for social reasons, and basically, I have the feeling the population is very often more educated than a lot of our politicians. It's not that the people know everything, but the people have a pretty good feeling that we are on the wrong track. And that is unfortunately a situation where we in Europe, from an economic crisis, are, I'm afraid, rather moving into a political crisis of our political institutions, which is a much bigger problem than just having an economic crisis.
Thank you. We have here, sir.
Management. So I come from education, and I'm very happy you talk about education and its importance. And it's really pity that in time of crisis, instead of investing in this, more people are forgetting it. But okay, some are more clever. I have a little bit more positive picture about innovations and entrepreneurship, because we make now, after I read the book of Hermann Simon from Germany about hidden champions, about most innovative companies, we try to see now in Central and Eastern Europe what kind of innovative and how many of those companies we have. And we shall present this research in Vienna on November 17 and 18. And we have about 120 innovative companies to present. you would be surprised, like Serbia has 14 innovative companies that are like #1 in Europe, because who is qualifying for hidden champion in our research? The one who is #1 in Europe or #2 or 3 in the world. And we have Serbia and Bosnia and Slovenia and Russia and etc., all East and Central European countries except 1 or 2. We didn't succeed to get good researchers. And concerning patents, I wanted to say that most of these innovators don't go for patents because they are so quickly and firstly innovating that they are afraid that they would steal them. So, you know, the intellectual property, so they are really, they are innovating all the time. And Slovenia, for instance, we researched, we were having in our research 9 companies. And Slovenes mostly know them already now because we were publicizing about that, you know. And they are really working for big systems, and they are #1. Like, you know, I can give some examples. And they are hidden champions because they want to be hidden. That's why they want to give patents, etc. So, since you are an angel, I hope you will come to Vienna and, I mean, empty your pockets there because these guys need cash. Thank you.
Gentleman in the first row, so he's waiting for some time.
I appreciate all of the comments that were made. So what I have to say has got nothing to do with that. I thought that was excellent present analysis. I'd like this to move us a little in the future. We haven't had an economic theory for the last industrial revolution. Communism, capitalism, Marxism, all that sort of stuff are early industrial age systems. We don't live in the industrial age. We're moving into a biological age and a conscious technology age, and we've got no new economic theory. I think it'd be very smart, I don't have to say I've got the answer here, it'd be very smart for us to start to think about what's new. We've been so worried about beating the Soviet Union that we're afraid to criticize capitalism. Doesn't mean that capitalism isn't good, and just like our reptilian brain, it's still there. But we build the next brain above it. We build on top of things. For example, the greatest innovations in the world are happening right now in open source. Microsoft opened up its code not because you wanted to, but you were forced to because of complexity. After 40 years of futures research, what I have to share is whatever you look at, fingernails, glasses, corporations, it's more complex than you'll believe is possible. Complexity drives open source systems, whether we like it or not. We have capitalism says private ownership. Communism said state or public ownership. Where the driving force is non-ownership. Who owns internet? How much wealth has been produced by internet? It's heralded as the greatest innovation of social change in history, and nobody owns it. Not state ownership, not individual ownership. Where does that fit in our economic theory? It doesn't. We have been out to lunch on creating the next economic theory. I would humbly suggest, as best as I'm able to be humble, that we need to take seriously fresh thinking about what economic theory next is. Public ownership, private ownership, non-ownership. Non-ownership is one element. There's many other elements that are visible today but have not been pulled together. And the next generation can be, I think, nurtured by understanding what's possible for the next economics beyond what we've had in the past.
I'm afraid I disagree. Adam Smith thought economic progress was gone through sort of job sharing, so division of labor. Then it was innovation with Schumpeter. And since Friedrich von Hayek, we know, and he used in this famous article he wrote in 1936 on the dissemination of knowledge, and it hasn't changed. Ownership is, there's not ownership of knowledge. we may talk about the ownership of means, of productive means and of finance and all this, but to share, to share the knowledge is one of the key drivers of innovation. This is not only in open open networks, but it's also in particular only possible in an open society. And that is the reason why the communist system failed, and why capitalism or market or whatever you like to call this, why they prevailed. It's because it was an open system and it's a competition of ideas. So to share knowledge, a dissemination of knowledge, this is basically about what is driving this economy. I only can recommend you Roman Friedman's newest book, Beyond Mechanical Markets. And I think INET, you may have heard this, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, based in New York, which had its first conference in Cambridge, the next one in Bretton Woods, where we were in April this year, and the next one is going to be early next year in Berlin. So I think there's a lot of going on in this, and I thought I should mention this, that Friedrich von Hayek was very early in making this stated that the key driver of economic dynamism is the dissemination of knowledge. Maybe a lot of people had forgotten that in the meantime.
You can have dissemination of knowledge in capitalism or communism. You can have dissemination of knowledge in capitalism or communism. What I'm suggesting to you is we haven't had a new economic theory in 200 years. Well, a little over 3 years.
Okay, you provoke Mr. Ambassador also, so...
Let me start out by saying what I'm about to say has nothing to do with OECD policy, and I know exactly what my economists would say if I said this, and they would say he's just as stupid as we thought he was. But, yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the crisis that we're going through, you know, it killed Milton Friedman, and it killed John Maynard Keynes. And it didn't invalidate their theories. It just invalidated them as dogma. And that the debates that we had been having over dogma, frankly, in the United States, we're still having them, but they look stupid now. And that the only thing that matters is becoming what works. And I think that in a crisis, okay, we've got to figure out how to get out of this. That'll teach us something about what works, but it won't teach us something about what works to get to the long term. A lot of the things we've been talking about, and theorists have talked about them before. There are people writing about open innovation and a lot of reconsideration of intellectual property laws and things like that. But we got to learn what works. We can't just make it up. And so we've got to take what we know, apply it, learn from it, try it again, and we'll get there. But, you know, we had something we went into the crisis with called the Washington Consensus. And that's pretty much dead. I mean, it's not invalid. It just, you know, it didn't work. It didn't work perfectly. It didn't work, period. And, you know, I don't want to see that replaced by a Beijing consensus. I don't want to see it replaced by Brussels consensus. I want us all to sort of get together and try to figure out what works and how do we do this. And I think one of the elements is we're going to go beyond economic policy into social policy, and that the social effects of economic policy have to be looked at a lot more as we go forward.
Okay, I think Mr. Morfight would like to add
I may give a slightly different view, because if you look at the, you know, recent crisis, I mean, an economist, they use, you know, very sophisticated mathematics models using, you know, supercomputers, whatever, you know, right? If you take economics as a discipline, there's a very little, you know, good behavioral economics, because this was also the crisis of emotions. And I'll tell you what is beneath it. It's driven by technology, because today, every, you know, second year, you are doubling amount of the information. I'm always giving students this example. How many people are dying in average, you know, because of the shark attack from the shark? How many people do you think they dying a year worldwide? It's between 10 to 15. Each and every, you know, shark attack is basically described in the global media. How many people do you think are dying because of the coconut is falling on their head in average? 150. So it's 10 times more dangerous, but you are not reading it in the media. That's just, you know, one example, right? How media are, you know, changing. And so what I try to say, we need to study both like hard facts but also emotions, because if you look at the markets, today, what the stock markets are doing, they are driven by headlines, right? It's not like nobody's anymore, studying what is beneath it. Like it's going, up and down, and it's driven by the headlines because we are globally connected,
Mr. Casanova, did you feel provoked? No?
Not for the moment. I mean, I could certainly express my opinion, but as a man in line with the company, a few comments can be made.
We have a gentleman there, yes.
Yeah, Jos Dauma is my name. I'm the Dutch ambassador to Slovenia. What I sensed a bit in Mr. Jungen's first intervention, but especially in his first answer, is a bit of government bashing. It's interesting because he's the president of the European Enterprise Institute. That means no doubt that you have lots of contact with governments. And Mr. Mulveit rightfully referred to this afternoon's first session, where it was about networking. And what we learned in the Netherlands is indeed that you have to network. We've done over ages, and we do it now. You need to work together. Mr. Castelnuovo did not respond to that Austrian question, but no doubt much of what BMW reaches in innovation has been developed together with government, one way or another. Subsidies, regulations who have been changed in the interest of the company or of the sector or of the certain object that you are investing in. So you really need networking. And you don't interest the government in networking by bashing it. You're right. The problem of governments is that you have elections. This afternoon we also learned that you need stable government, so the Chinese representative was quite proud. But that is not the government we want in Western Europe or in America. That's the first remark. The second remark is, and it again refers to Mr. Jungen, I like statistics. But when you compare Europe with America, what of the both units is highly indebted? I think both. So you should mention them both. When you refer to education, access to school, especially primary schooling, good quality secondary schooling, you should quote all statistics and then give the right picture. We in Europe work together with 27 countries, which is not easy. We have 27 mentalities and maybe even more. So we try to do our utmost. We reach quite some interesting results, and we know that we have to beat the others. And I think that companies profit from it. Mr. Castelnuovo no doubt can confirm that. Thank you very much.
If I can quickly jump in on that, because managing 10 different countries with 9 languages or 7 currencies is quite a pain in the neck. So definitely if we could get things a little bit simpler around this very old Europe, it could definitely make things a lot easier and speed up things. Because yes, it's all about innovation, but it's as well about speed. And when you have to cope with this great diversity, speed sometimes is lacking somehow.
As to the debt, just the one on this. Yeah, it's true. The average debt to GDP ratio in a Eurozone, or EU almost similar, is like the US. The difference is the US is the world leading currency reserve currency in the world, and that's their advantage. So we are not this. That's the one point. The second, unfortunately, we have a number of countries in Europe who are indebted up to 150, 160%. Greece, of course, is insolvent. And the European politicians always do that this is a liquidity problem. It's not a liquidity problem. This country is bust. And as long as we not consider that and realize this, we are not going to solve these problems. Therefore, and the last remark, if you take the foreign debt of the United States and take the most important ratio, and that is foreign debts to foreign assets. Foreign assets to foreign debt in the US is 120%. And that's a key difference to most of the European countries.
Okay, we have another question here in the middle.
Thank you. Blaž Golob, Center for E-Governance Development. Let me just refer to the question of stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders enabling innovation? And where I see a failure in the past when we built in 2001 Europe, the most competitive, innovative Europe, by 2010, defined by Lisbon strategy, a major failure was not communication between stakeholders, and also not communication the proper with the politicians. And here I would not put on the stage like there is politicians, they do not communicate. I really admire those of them who do a good job and they are responsible. We have 193 states dealing about the life of 7 billion people. So if we do not communicate in a proper way as a knowledge elite, industry elite, with politicians, we fail. And I think they are also very relevant stakeholders to be involved in the future. It is a paradox because a situation produces less quality politicians because of that. But if we fail that, believe me, we will fail also a creation of innovation and innovative future. I will just give you one short remark, an example. It was a 3% on R&D, a big mantra that countries should achieve to achieve Lisbon goals. So it was must, 3%. A colleague of mine, science minister of Romania, told me in 2002, Blaž, this is frustration. We have 0.1% on 0.25 spent on R&D. So how to reach 3%? This is impossible. So it was a frustration Lisbon strategy for Romania. Why? Because it was not communicated in a proper way. So again, stakeholders, even politicians, should be involved if we want that we enable an environment to create innovation. And now I have a question also for prestigious professors. How many stakeholders you involve in debate in a way to push the agenda through? Thank you very much.
I think this was a question for Mr. Jungan, or yes?
I'm not sure whether I understood the question. How many stakeholders?
Okay, let's put it this way. What are the channels for exchanging the views, and then you see how they take on board your suggestions as a pressure group or an interest group, that they take on board your suggestions. For example, in order that at the end of the day we achieve an environment, a suitable environment for progress, for innovation.
Can I tell you something? You may be shocked. That I tell you that I think politicians have to realize they today need more the entrepreneurs than the politicians need the entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs, they can move around and choose their own politicians or politics. I'm not buying them, quite frankly. They can go where the best economic and political environment is in place. Now, an entrepreneurship-friendly environment doesn't mean to do a favor to entrepreneurs, but it basically means nothing else, to use the entrepreneur to solve a problem which politics can't solve, to employ people, to create jobs, to create growth, to create new products and services, and with this creating demand, getting new jobs, and creating income, creating wealth, and all this. So I think the most important lesson for politicians is to understand that they need the entrepreneurs more than the entrepreneurs need the politicians. That was in closed societies, that was different, but not in an open world today. And unfortunately, you see so many people who start a business in another country. One of the most important things for the US is migration entrepreneurship, or entrepreneurs who migrated there. 40% of all startups in Silicon Valley the last 20 years have been founded by people who migrated there, who were born abroad. 60% of IT-based startups in Silicon Valley have been created by Chinese, Koreans, or Indian immigrants. And I think this is one of the other things. Europe doesn't attract talents of the world. The United States are still attracting the capital of the world and the talents of the world and bring them together to work together. We in Europe, we're trying to shut this off, and we are not attracting them. And this is a very bad thing, what we see. We need the best talents of the world, and if they're not Europeans and not the best entrepreneurs, we have to hire them. If you can't educate them, we have to hire them. So, quite frankly, I do not believe very much in all of these roundtable dialogues. There's so much sharing of ideas and information is available. And I don't know whether the entrepreneurs are therefore to educate politicians. That is rather a question than maybe an answer.
If I would add what the Dutch ambassador said, we try to be engaged as much as we can. I'm in my advisory capacity, the advisor in a couple of countries, even to the prime ministers. But one project relative to what Peter said, Europe is very close for the talent, absolutely. In the US, 50% of the students at the universities are non-American. Here in Europe, it's 2.6%. I'm in the worldwide board of ISEC, which is the biggest student organization. They do internships, right? It takes 8 months to get a visa for non-Europeans. And those are like top talented kids from China, India, all of those places. So guess what? They go to US or somewhere else. This is it. So if we move with the visa, it's one thing. We can do one tangible thing we can do. That will be a huge success. And I try to do it through the 4 presidencies in EU, but there's very little progress still.
I really can confirm that with ISEC. I'm on the board of ISEC. I really can confirm that it's a hell of a problem to exchange these people. And therefore, I think one of the basic lessons we have to learn in Europe to become a much more open to the world. We cannot be just exporting to the world. We need the talents of the world. The real competition in the world in the future is about talents. And those parts of the world who attract the best talents will be successful. And the sort of a mixed culture is highly profitable, is highly successful because of sharing of experience and, again, of dissemination of knowledge and very different knowledge from very different angels. So therefore, I think there's a lot of things Europe can still learn, and the politicians have to learn. And quite frankly, if the politicians don't learn it, the best talents will leave Europe. And then what are the politicians doing? They're basically left over with the net recipients of government money, but there's nobody to finance them anymore. And this is the thing. Look at venture capital. Venture capital in the United States is 20 billion last year, formal venture capital. 20 billion is angel investment. How much do you think in Europe? 3 billion is venture capital, roughly 200 Eurozone, maybe 200 million venture capital. So basically you could say Europe is 1 to 100 to the US, although the economy is almost the same size. Angel investment in the last year is about 19 billion in the United States. In Europe, maybe 200. In Germany, 20 million. So it's 1 to 1,000. In an economy which is only 4 times larger in terms of GDP. This is the key, financing of innovation. So many startups try to leave Europe or try to get financing from US venture capital, and a lot of the capital is from European source. It's not necessarily American capital, which is involved in the VC funds. There is more European capital invested by US venture capital funds in the US than European capital invested through venture capital funds in Europe. We should think about this. Why is capital leaving? Why are talents leaving? 2/3 of all postgraduate doctoral students who go to the United States from Europe don't come back. That is, we are exporting more and more talents, and not only machines. To export machines is one thing. Exporting talents means in a couple of years' time, we won't export machines anymore.
Just a minute. Mr. Castronova, you are a company who needs such talents. The Europe is facing the lack of technical engineers and digital skilled workers. How are you solving this problem? How do you keep these people?
Well, from this point of view, we're quite lucky because so far we get excellent engineers and very good people. Nevertheless, just to reinforce the point you were just making, when we recently found a company about new mobility services that was not found in Europe, that was found in the United States.
Yeah. Thank you. I would just like go a little bit back. I completely agree with everything what you said, but what you said was already evident 10 years ago. No change in 10 years. What you said was already evident 10 years ago. So, fully agree with you, immediately sign what you say. But, what is the way forward for improvement, for better involvement of those who at the end decide? And I would start with Turkey. You fly Turkey, Istanbul, Antalya, 3 Airbus flights, 300 people, 80% of them young, between 25, 30, drafting a contract to do business when the plane is coming down. You fly Ljubljana, Brussels, small plane, half of them going to negotiate with European Commission. No entrepreneurs. So, I completely understand what you say. This was already 10 years ago. Now tell me, what is the change? What are the new ways of convincing those who decide? And to make change, of course, or at least to enable us a freedom that we do our own way. So this is my point. Thank you very much.
I think, just a minute. Mr. Mulfheit already said in the beginning, you just have to break the illusion.
Can I add one sentence, please?
Yes.
Just one sentence. Boris Cecil, Knowledge Economy Network. To add on, I think that we are talking of politicians and we think of executive branch only. Let me just quote one example. Canada has made a tremendous advance by reaching within G8 group. And what did they do? They are convincing the parliamentarians every year. They have a good session with the whole parliament explaining what is the advantage of innovation for the Canadian society. And that seems to help. Thank you.
Somebody else? No. You would like to say yes, of course.
I think we have to go back and I didn't mention, that wasn't by chance that I mentioned Adam Smith, 1776 at the beginning. I think we probably have to look back and have to see how did we get where we are? And that is through constant innovation, breakthrough innovation. Otherwise, a lot of politicians say, oh, we will fight for each job. And my response is workers and employees should not consider that as a promise, rather they consider that as a threat. That because if they would have done this 200 years ago, we all would be still working on the farm on the same job our grandparents had. And therefore, I think that constant change is the basis of our wealth or the well-being. The word commonwealth is not a political description of what the UK organized. It's a word from John Locke's books, the Commonwealth. And it's something explaining that we were talking about, like the word property. Property was not a building. Property was that you own yourself, your talents. And I think this is the key to understand and to bring forward that that is the basis for progress we made over the 250-odd years since the beginning of capitalism or industrialization. And I think as long as we understand, or we do not understand, that the constant change is the basis, and allow a society to basically feel not to change and to keep where we are and to stick where we are. And if politicians confirm maybe this basic feeling of people that don't want to be insecure, they miss really leading the people. And I think we have a really basic problem. And that is to simply say, for instance, and we need a new patent regime. Who said that? Obama, at 2:00 a.m. this morning in a speech. I happened to see that somewhere. You need a new patent regime. The EU is dealing in the year 21 on a new patent regime. The new patent regime is now a part new patent regime only because some countries insisted on having their own patents only be accepted if it's translated in their language. It costs 10 times as much as in Europe compared to the US to register a patent. If you are a startup and you start with 25,000 euro, if you want to register one patent, your 25,000 euro is gone before you have your first patent registered. So the best is you don't register your patent, but the best would be that the politicians come up with a Euro patent regime which would have said one language, and that would be very easy. I mean, everybody speaks, well, some English. Is not the best English. The joke is now, what's the most spoken language in the world? And some people say it's Mandarin, and some people say it's Spanish. Or so. It's all wrong. The most spoken language in the world is bad English, as we know. And therefore, even in bad English, we would have the patents, but we have one language. Yeah. And therefore, I say there are so many examples where we know what we should do, but there are too many vested interests. Politicians always fall in the trap with. I don't know why. Maybe you can tell me.
Thank you very much. I am Denis Koundoureas, Greek ambassador in Ljubljana. I fully agree with you about the importance and the role of innovation in today's world. I think traditionally, through the centuries, innovation was the essence of progress. But allow me to express some second thoughts, let us say, about or side effects or something like that, about today's world debate about innovation. My feeling is that the whole approach is based on two concepts: overproduction and overconsumption. And nobody cares about consumers. And there is a huge number of innovative, into brackets, products useless, totally useless. And the banking system also very much supports this approach by loans to the ordinary middle-class people. And nobody cares about values, traditional values, I mean, and the fact that innovation, technology, etc., should have as the central, the very central, let us say, of the interest of the human being. So in today's world crisis, economic crisis, everybody agrees, I think, economists around the world, including in the United States and in Europe, that the problem is rather moral than economic or anything else. Finally, I fully agree with you that education is of paramount importance for innovation, but also for progress. But what kind of education? Just simply universities directly linked with enterprises, the American approach, or let us say a broad mind approach of the young generation about the style and way of life. In any case, I have no doubt that innovation must be supported by all means, by politicians. And our role as ambassadors as well is to support this on various occasions. But please, leaders of innovation should have second thoughts and should have taken into account the human factor. Thank you very much.
Well, till now we were mostly talking about innovations in a way that they are making competitive advantage, but innovations are not necessarily just useful in competitive way. They can improve our lives in a sense of improving our healthcare, make it easier to educate people and so on. BMW, your attitude with is also have a social impact with reducing emissions, with your responsible attitude to the society. So innovation doesn't have to be really just commercial, let's say.
Well, in a sense, sorry to disagree with you, but yes, because we can have the best innovation, but if nobody buys it, it's wasted. Of course, there are innovations that help our life. Light bulb instead of a candle, much easier. Cars that can park by themselves, much easier. Cars that avoid collision with another vehicle, much safer. Cars that can call directly the emergency service whenever the airbag pops out. That's a standard feature in BMW. So these kind of things, yes. Now, do customers pay for that? Not always. But can this contribute to a better life? Yes. Can this contribute to a competitive advantage versus relevant competition? Yes. So in a sense, even if customer doesn't buy it, it does add on to a competitive advantage which differentiates us from the competition, and therefore it is worthwhile investing.
Can I say, I think it would be a great misunderstanding to reduce capitalism just on economics. Capitalism has always been much more than just an economic system. Capitalism has killed feudalism. Capitalism is about freedom. Capitalism is about individual talents. And capitalism is about equal rights. Capitalism is about access to take part in life. Before, and it's only in capitalism, before that, you only could start a business or have a business when you were rich. In capitalism, for the first time in the history of mankind, you can start a business without having any funds. You can start a company without being rich. It may be a way to become rich, but you don't have to be rich to be an entrepreneur. And that is the key difference to any society before. Capitalism basically is the strongest freedom creative machine in the history of mankind. And I know this is not very popular in Europe, but that's the fact. And capitalism has changed cultural institutions. It has changed the way people think, the way people act, the way people live. And most of the innovation have improved the life of people. They are driven, of course, by the idea of people to make a business, but most of them are first driven by to do something new and to realize an idea. Innovation is not about just having an idea. Innovation is putting the idea to work. And that is the key to just people who may think that ideas is the key. No, putting ideas to work, that is the key. And that's the innovation, the difference between innovation and invention. So capitalism, market economy has always been about cultural change and not just about economic change. And it has improved the life conditions of billions of people in the world in a dramatic way. Think about, without all this innovation being converted into simple products and machines and applications in the medical sector, in logistics and wherever, what would the life of people look like today? So it has improved the life of the small guy. The thing, Adam Smith was not about silk stocking for the queen. Adam Smith was about every woman should have silk stockings. And I think that is the key difference to what many people try to reduce this on, when they say, on sheer economic terms of profit. No, it's about the well-being of people. If someone disagrees, please raise your hand and explain it in a better way to me.
Okay, gentleman there again.
Thank you very much. We now enter a very interesting area. And that's very good because for the first time in man's history, capitalism allows me to say something what I could not say in communism. And capitalism enabled me to really express my freedom to say what I was not able to say in socialism. What I could say now in capitalism is that capitalism is bullshit. And thanks to capitalism, I could say this. That's a maximum freedom. Thank you.
You know what someone said in journalists said the difference between capitalism and socialism is when you say in socialism, to use your word, is bullshit, you end up in prison. If you say in capitalism is bullshit, you end up in television.
Can I make one more comment that sort of goes beyond the capitalism? And I have a question too. I don't know why all the questions come from this side of the room, but you people are falling down on the job.
Maybe it's politically based.
Maybe that's the way people sit.
Is the left or the right side?
But the part of the underlying thought in some of this conversation is that somehow technology destroys culture. And I've been hearing that like my whole life. And it's never been true. And it's less true now than it ever was.
Absolutely.
And, you know, this is the secret to, you know, Bulgarian chants and Romanian singers and, you know, obscure niche market things and small groups that didn't know that somebody else actually cared about what did they care about, getting together and finding each other. And it's, you know, it's MIT courses now. You can take an MIT course on your smartphone. It's open education for kids in villages who can do Khan Academy courses now. And it's just, it's the world's libraries and the world's art galleries. And so it's made culture available and learning available and even social benefits available in whole new ways. And if there's any real failure of governments, it's really not to use those tools to do it even better. So.
Any other comment?
Thank you very much. I'm Eugenio Curia, the ambassador of Argentina. Yeah. And I can have a look to you Europeans with a distant, but at the same time with a big sense of that you are going no way. But the entrepreneurs talk, as the Dutch ambassador said, like politics is bullshit. But you live within societies in which politicians came out from those societies. I mean, I don't care, and it looks like that perhaps in the last 50 years you have changed a lot on that. But, and I don't want to mention politicians from specific countries, just go through the economies, which has a clear cut towards Berlusconi, to put it clearly. But as you said, that you lose your time talking to politicians, but in the end, you need them. So I don't understand quite well. It's very simple to criticize, saying they don't understand, or if they know, they don't act. In the end, it's the society will produce them. The political parties, or whatever it is. You have gone through different situations, but in the end, what happens is there are societies that doesn't work properly, the way you put it. Because, I mean, the politicians are not imposed by foreigners. And I agree with you, Europe is in a very sick situation from every point of view, and for us, looking from the other side, to have a strong European Union, but a real one who counts in power politics, would be very important, which is not the case. But my question to the entrepreneurs, that you have a networking with the politicians and you have to live with them. I mean, perhaps it's part of the some funds that the entrepreneurs should invest in creating better schools of formation de cadre, in order to get better politicians, perhaps. Why don't you think about that?
But just please take it as a personal comment. I have met several politicians from different countries, and their main interest, of course, is the votes. And the way they get votes is via properly or adequately distributing wealth. Now, the whole issue about Europe appears to be now that this wealth that has been created over the years and even through taking debts, so for future growth, now it's come to very close to an end, because we're discussing plus 0.5, 1% GDP growth, it's no growth. So maybe the tipping point will be whenever politicians will not be able to distribute wealth, taking loans on the future generations, but they will have to start thinking about how to generate growth in order to have sufficient wealth to be distributed. Maybe that could change. So from the company point of view, I would say whenever we talk to politicians about ways of speeding up the business, or ways of speeding up innovation, I've hardly found ears open and ready to act, unfortunately.
Obviously, yes, of course.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And I think you may have, I have the impression one or two of you find me pessimistic. Now, what I said today is my sort of optimistic version. And I am, because as politics run out of money, this is the best news of the century. Because the less money they have, the less stupid things could be financed. And the more, we need not only innovation only in economics and in technology, we need innovation in politics. And politicians talk always about innovation in industry. No, 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 we need innovation in politics. The very day when politics is not reduced of taking money from the one part of the society and handing it over to the others, then the politicians really have to do their job. And as long as they all are members of the largest sort of movement in the world, and that is OPM, other people's money, and that is the largest political movement in the world, this is coming to an end. And this is great for civil society, because then politicians are not reduced of just spending other people's money. They should help other peoples to create money, or to create wealth, to put the right framework conditions in place, to give role models, not only a role model for, if you're a soccer player, it's perfectly okay if you make 11 million after tax. If you're the CEO of the largest Deutsche Bank and you make 11 million before tax, this is morally unacceptable. Give me a break. A society which thinks like that must be insane. And politicians are bashing entrepreneurs and managers instead of creating role models. And that's a different thing in the United States. I'm not saying this because John is here, but Bill Gates is a kind of a hero in the US for kids, for young people. I don't see that in Europe. We have a winner culture in Europe, but only in sports, not in business. And as long as the federal president, the commission president, not each year makes a big fuss about receiving the best young entrepreneurs, the best women startups in Europe, and all this. But of course, if the soccer team comes in number 3, they all get furious and become hysteric, and the federal president goes to South Africa and gives the soccer player, the coach, the Medal of Honor or what, or the Bundesverdienstkreuz. I mean, as long as this is the way politics treat the businessman, they shouldn't be surprised. It's not about the businessmen. They can live with this. But they fail in using the talents of business people and entrepreneurs and of creative people. What Jan said about schools. If young people go to school, the most creative part of our society are kids. I'm a grandpa since 8 months. It's incredible to see what in 8 months happens. And it's incredible to see how creative a kid is already in that age. And I'm sure once they've gone through all the educational institutions, they have reduced, they've killed any kind of creativity in these kids. They're taught by mostly socialist teachers about capitalism and the bad side of capitalism, and technology is always very bad, and innovation kills your habits, and all this. No, we are a risk-averse, technology-averse, innovation-averse society in Europe. And the real difference was not Rumsfeld making, when you said the old and the new Europe being the post-communist Europe and the old Europe, Western Europe. No, the real difference is, in my view, the old Europe, that's we in Europe. The new Europe, that's the United States, is the best ideas and thoughts Europe ever has created. The Scottish Enlightenment and the ideas of capitalism have been exported to the United States or to North America, into the colony. And so the first and the only country until now which is based on the ideas of the Scottish Enlightenment of John Locke and David Hume and Edmund Burke and Adam Smith, is the United States. And we Europeans should be really proud of what we have created in the world. We have exported these ideas, and now they have conquered the whole world, and now they're knocking on the European doors, and the Europeans are shocked to see the results of their ideas, which they have exported into the world, which had no chance to be applied in Europe in 776, with the monarchies we had in Europe, and the people who wanted to do something and wanted to live in freedom, they left Europe. So some very bad people say there are two groups of Europeans. The ones who made it and came to North America, and the others are the Europeans who missed the boat.
We have there back, gentlemen.
Oh, just a question. Question. Yeah, do you think do you think we can still somehow educate them to stop this procedure? I mean, the Europeans, can we talk to Americans to educate them and to say, hey, listen, don't go out too much? We sent them a few years ago to the States, and they did what they did, and now we have only dollar in the world. Why we don't have many currencies? I mean, we have to compete. Shall I follow it up? Yes. And
Mr. Murfight is willing to answer.
My answer is no, because there is China. And China is sitting today on $3 trillion. So as of yesterday, they could buy the 5 highly capitalized companies on the stock exchange twice. Okay, so the world really changed. It's no more
it's only
about
dollar.
Europe and US, indeed.
It's dollar.
There is absolutely, and that's happening because of the technology.
No, it's okay. So it's dollar. No competition in the future.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it can't be solved between, if the question was whether it can be solved between Europe and the United States, no. There's no global issue which can be solved without the contribution of China.
Yes, my call on him to talk was a bit undiplomatic. I become now even more undiplomatic. I'm quite often quite irritated by my government, especially this morning, before coming here. In the end of the afternoon, at last I got a result, a phone call, so I was lucky. So indeed, I fully agree. Working for government, and no doubt working in government, I've been in politics myself, is not easy. But I'm a civil servant now, and I'm well paid. I have had a long day, and we have 10 minutes or about 12 minutes left. And the theme of tonight is the power of innovation. And what have we done? The same as last year in the Night Owl session. This is my third forum. I am afraid that I might not show up to the Night Owl session next year because I'm always talked down. I want to be upbeat. I want to leave upbeat for having a good sleep. What is the power of innovation, gentlemen? Mr. Boucher represents the OECD. I have, in the late 80s, together with colleagues from Japan and wherever, studied the rise of young democracies and young economies in Asia, and we tried to learn lessons from it. And we learned lessons from it in the West. And OECD is combining government's strength to teach us all good lessons. And if need be, naming and shaming. And we Dutch, we like naming and shaming if need be. But please do it in an optimistic mood. Let us learn a lesson, a positive lesson, and don't talk us down. Statistics, it's all okay. Talk to statistics, but use them in good comparison. Set benchmarks and challenge us, but don't challenge us with only negative language. I hate it, and then I regret to have spent my evening here. Thank you very much.
I'm very glad that you didn't say that you would fall asleep now after you have been attending this. I was afraid that someone would say that. So as long as you say you can't sleep after our talk, I think this is very good news. And if you want to rather sleep, you choose you can use television or something.
We're talking about the power of innovation. I can take you for a nice ride in one of our cars. Maybe that could take some pleasure in innovation.
Can I say one or two things? Okay, the difference between this side of the room and that side of the room, this is where the bar is. I finally figured it out, okay. Now, so the second thing I want to say is, we've got somebody over there who's visited. So I will say something very quickly and let him get in. But I hate to be the one who stands up in favor of Europe and the one who stands up in favor of governments. But you got to say some things are going right around here. This reminds me of one of these conversations we have in the United States about how we've messed everything up and China's going to eat our lunch. Or 20 years ago, we've messed everything up and Japan's going to eat our lunch. Or 40 years ago, we've messed everything up and Germany's eating our lunch. So, we have to go through this in order to get better, and it's cathartic and it's good for us all, and you have to go through it too, sorry. But there are things that happen in this crisis that I don't think we've looked at closely enough and that we understand very well yet. The theory was always that the United States was flexible, responsive, we didn't have a lot of labor protection, we didn't have social welfare systems. We went into crisis, we lost a lot of jobs, but we got them back quickly, and in the process we adapted and moved forward. Well, it hasn't happened. Where are the jobs being created now? In Germany, Sweden. Those are the sort of the archetypical, archetypical? I don't even know how to, it's bad English. But those are the places where the social welfare state, everybody's taken care of, there's no incentive to do anything new. But in fact, I think many of us in the United States never realized that over the last 10 or 15 years, Germany, Sweden, Finland, a lot of places have done an awful lot to sort of either change the system or at least fine-tune the system so that market incentives are there, so that labor policies are not, they're not protecting old industries, they're preparing people for new ones. And as we look at skill strategies now, we're finding some very good examples of those places. People going to college is very important numbers. We publish them all the time. But there's also problems with them. When I was growing up, the United States was very proud that 60% of our high school kids went to college. And if you look at the charts, 60% of our high school kids still go to college. But in the meantime, everybody else has increased their percentage. And the Koreans went from, really low up to something like 95% now. Now, you attenuate that with the fact as we start to look at skills to really perform, make decisions, integrate information, work in a modern economy, and it turns out that the correlation between education and skills is not as tight as you might think. And that there are a lot of high school programs, a lot of secondary programs that give people what you might call tertiary skills, and a lot of tertiary schools that don't give people those skills. So it's a lot more, there are good things in Europe too, I guess is what I'm saying. And some of your schools perform well, some of your countries perform well, and on some critical things like job creation, you're doing a lot better than the States.
Hello. Yes, it's the last
Somebody
question.
on the right side, yes.
The last questions, I think so far, it won't be long. So, gentlemen, first let me thank you for a very interesting discussion. I think everybody joined me. My name is Boris. I'm from Russia. It was Russian Federation mass media. It was very interesting to hear about socialism because I'm the person who grew up during socialist time. I wouldn't say it is worse than capitalism, but I'm not communist. No. So my question is, why Russian Federation was not mentioned tonight? Because countries like United States, countries like China, Korea were mentioned as countries for innovation. And from another side, the crisis is, Europe is very comfortable to live, and really it is very comfortable to stay here. But on another side, Russian Federation, to my mind, it is really a huge field where all innovation could be exported for the future, because we need them. We badly need them. We have everyday airplane crashes because airplanes are very old, and we do not have technologies which are developing by that time. I think maybe more close cooperation with Russia, but though Russia is Russia, is the way out. So thank you very much for your attention.
We, let me say, we do a lot of work with Russia. Russia is in the process of acceding to the OECD, so they're across the board doing stuff. We do a lot of work with Russia on innovation. And as you know, Russia has investments in innovation centers and lots of ideas on this. But, you know, if you look at the facts, Russian innovation takes place in New York, California, and Israel. It's migration innovation right now. And I think a lot of it goes back to where I started talking about innovation, the economics. It's the entrepreneurship, the open environment, the competition environment, the finance environment, the regulatory environment, protection of property, intellectual and otherwise. And you need to get the framework conditions right before you can really expect it to grow in Russia. The minds are there, the ideas are there, creativity is there, but I don't think we've really seen the businesses to be able to be created yet in Russia. And I agree, the potential's there, but they got to work their way through a lot of change.
Okay.
Russia is not ready to get innovation right now because of its internal politics.
I don't suppose it's a all-at-once kind of thing. It's not, you can't do it today, but tomorrow or next year you can. But that kind of creative environment that keeps moving forward every day, there needs to be a lot more openness in the economy to get that.
Okay, another one there back.
I am Bardas Papai from Kosovo, and I really enjoyed this discussion tonight and the questions and the different perspectives given. And the one thing I was, as a new country, that we try to look at different models every so often. When we write a piece of legislation at our assembly, we go to internet and find other laws, how other countries have solved this or that problem, including elections, rule of law, democratic institutions, and so on, as well as the market economy and how we regulate our internal market, especially we look every so often at the EU directives and EU regulations. And hearing at the discussions tonight, what came to my mind is that although we have this market-oriented economy where the state does not play any big role, and innovation is part of the open market economy, still we do have those crises that are happening, especially in Europe and especially in those countries that are very open market-oriented, where the state has less role. Now, the question that would be for the panel is, are we at the time where the market forces should be more accountable to the governments and to politicians, or should the politicians and governments should be more accountable to the market forces? Because even from the discussions where when we hear tonight, it's like we don't need politicians that much. But again, those are the ones that set the framework and set the rules within which we have to play. And now, is either something wrong with those rules that are being set by politicians or by the players that are playing within those rules? So that's something that I wanted to hear from you, like who should be more accountable to market forces, to the politicians and governments, or the governments to the, or the vice versa, like.
Okay.
I'll go back because Peter started to talk about Adam Smith, right? And I'm also, as you know, our Russian colleague. I have a German name, but I was born in Czechoslovakia. So in fact, I've got my diploma during the communist regime. I'm only one in the Microsoft leadership who's got a, you know, I have a state exam from scientific communism, whatever scientific and communism means together. But why I'm saying that the first book I read about the capitalism was Wealth of the Nations, right? And what Adam Smith is saying in that book, that, you know, profit and care about the others, care about the society, can live, you know, together, right? And I think last, let's say, 20 years, we concentrate a lot on, you know, profit, not that much on, you know, care, and we need to get the balance back. And it doesn't matter whether it's, you know, government or, you know, enterprises. We need to get it back. And I think unless, because there was a question on education, on the business education, I think we teach, you know, profit very well today, like kind of traditional, you know, what we do in the business, sales, marketing, but we don't teach enough emotional intelligence, we don't teach enough soft skills. And that's something which you will need in the century, because as Peter said and I said, we will compete mainly through the ability to unlock talent. So it's important how you connect with the other people, how you inspire people, how you motivate people in the future. And that's not taught today in the schools at all. Even self-awareness. You need to, first, if you want to understand the others, you need to understand yourself. And self-awareness as such is not taught in the schools today. So that's kind of the bigger concept, if you will, how I see the capitalism for the future.
If I may add another comment, if we think how many times we as men of business have seen our companies reinvent themselves, reorganize themselves. And if you do the same count for how many times our political systems have reinvented themselves in the last 50 or 100 years, quite surprised.
I'd like to make a short remark. There are too many people in, in capitalism who thinks that profits is a reward, which of course is nonsense. And I think they're even entitled to the reward, which is even more nonsense if this is possible. Profits is nothing else than an indicator that an entrepreneur has produced and offered a service or a product which the consumers like. So if you hit consumer advantage, then you make a profit. And if you don't do that, you lose out. So the important thing is not to have a debate about profits. The more profit is there in an economy, the more successful the economy is. Innovation is not a one-sided supply-side thing. You also need the risk. The consumer, who is venturesome, as Amabide called them, not only the entrepreneur. And then the profit is an indicator that someone has put not only the right products on the shelf, but is able to produce them at costs which is acceptable to the consumer. This is the key. What we have seen in the last year is that obviously people made profits and then boni and whatever out of this, whether people had the feeling this has nothing to do with this innovation thing. And I think here we have to be very careful. I'm not defending capitalists, I'm defending capitalism. And for us, it's not important to save capitalists, it's important to save capitalism. Not to do a favor to capitalists, but everyone in the society is profiteering in an incredible way from this system. And I think the debate we have is a debate about check and balance. And we may have overreacted to the one side. We may see overreacted to the other side. And the biggest danger today is not the profit is made. The biggest danger today is that people say we may do away with capitalism, and that would be the biggest mistake we could make. There's one thing, we could be pretty relaxed about this. The Chinese, the Indians, and the Brazilians, they will defend market economy and capitalism, whatever the European intellectuals are going to do and going to think about this.
Okay, last question.
When you say that the more profitable the society, the more successful, if there is no such thing as an environment, that's true. We haven't put in the externalities of climate change, water pollution, in that equation. We haven't done it. What I said to you before, I think, is very sad. This conference is about power of the future, not power of the present. What you've been telling me about is success of capitalism over communism. I agree. I'm one of the few people in this conference who's risked his life during the Cold War in different countries without any backup. So I don't need a lecture about why it's better than communism. What I'm telling you is the rate of change is faster than what you're looking at. The rate of change for the last 50 years is going to be nothing compared to the next 20 years. That non-ownership is a driving force. You didn't recognize that. It doesn't fit in the different economic theories. I think it is disgusting to have a panel of brilliant brains like yours, and you have told me about the past successes. I want to see something about the future. We have not said a word about the future of economics, the future of these things. You've told me about brilliance in the past. We all know that. So I have sympathy with my friend in the back saying, it's disappointing. Think about the future. Are we only going to have one economic future forever? I don't think that's true. You go back several hundred years ago, feudalism was it. Right? Feudalism was the big deal. The rate of innovation is going much faster than I'm hearing here. And it also will apply to economics. It has not yet. It has not applied to gravitation. There are several areas where it hasn't applied. Many others it has, but it will catch up to economics. Non-ownership was just one of 32 elements I've looked at. One of 32 elements. And the next economic theory, I think, will be far more complex than anything we can understand today. But simply to reinforce the past of success doesn't get us to the next success.
Okay, let's move from the economic theory of social systems to the future. Mr. Junger was before talking about that in the few years the world will fall apart of two parts. I think that we didn't agree on much things today, but there is one thing that we do agree, that Europe is losing their race with the other part of the world, and also that innovations are globalizing. That's the fact. Mr. Boucher, what will be, in which part of these two worlds will be Europe, I don't know, in 20 years? Are we going to be in the first part, successful one, or not?
I don't really know how to answer that question, because I don't think Europe's as unified as a lot of this conversation implies. I think there are going to be successes in Europe and failures in Europe, and the goal's got to be to sort of learn from your successes, and the better Europeans do that, the better they'll be. I mean, the example from Kosovo, you know, we look around at other people, what they're doing, what works. That's really the theory behind the OECD. We get policy wonks together. We get tax people and competition people and, you know, pension administrators together, and they try to figure out, you know, maybe that'll work for me if he does it and why it didn't work and things like that. And those are the kind of issues that we're trying to take. Now, how do you project that way into the future? It's biological. You just got to keep evolving and some of the ideas die and some of the ideas prosper and become something else. And I guess I'm more of an evolutionary than I am a breakthrough theorist, but that's kind of where I see us going. That's where I see Europe going. We all talk about China. I went to China in 1979 and was in Shanghai in the mid-'80s, and we used to have, I mean, in '79 when I went to China, you give people Samuelson's economics textbooks, and that was like the best gift you could get. You know, in the '80s, I used to talk to the guys at the Shanghai Economic Herald who were out figuring out the world, and they would ask me questions like, how does the United States control foreign exchange? And, you know, and say, well, I had 4 months of that in college, and the answer is we don't. You don't! And it's great conversation, but, you know, they've gotten way beyond that now, but they've also, you know, they haven't learned from the hard knocks either. They haven't had their crisis. They've got credit bubbles and housing bubbles to deal with. And if you really look at China, they're starting to bump into a different set of problems that aren't purely economic problems. They're bumping into, you don't have free markets unless you have an open information environment. You don't have good exchanges and capital formation unless you've got fair regulation. You don't have constant renewal unless you have accountability for officials. And those are all things that take place naturally in democracies. Now, they can do a lot of things right. They can assign good teachers to bad schools and come out way high on PISA, and that's to their credit. And they can do a lot with manufacturing. They can develop some technologies, not all, but some technologies that are susceptible to, you know, direct investment and direction. But I don't think China's the model, and I even don't think the United States is the model. Somehow we're just going to have to keep moving forward and hope that this thing, you know, grows into a beast that's not a dinosaur and it's a little more like a Neanderthal.
Mr. Juncker, are we going to catch up? Are we going to be able to be the between winners of this race?
Okay. I have no answer to that. If I would have the answer, I wouldn't be sitting here. The thing is, we have to understand, and hopefully we understand, that these systems and our societies are open-end systems. They are result-open. If innovation is about the unknown, we cannot predict the course of innovation because then it would be not innovation. And I think we can learn this all from the Austrians. I mean, not from the Austrian people today, but from the Austrian school, from Popper and Hayek, and not Popper's the Vienna Kreis, but from Hayek and Mises and Menger and all this. And I think this is so important that we understand, as Veblen said in 1898, economics is an evolutionary science and is not about models. And we've been trying to put this in mathematical models, and they will run sort of by computers, and the rest could be seen in the last couple of years. I have not the feeling that Europe is in a catching up program. I think we are rather in the moment on a more slippery road, and I don't know how long this will happen. But there's a lot positive to be said about Europe. If you look around, you have great social security systems. You have great tax systems in Europe. You have a lot of, most of the invention and the innovative systems we have today in tax system in Europe is the former communist countries. We have the interesting thing that most of the Western European countries are following a Marx proposal of the progressive income tax, which he wrote in peace in 1848 in the Manifest. He proposed the introduction of a progressive income tax, and unfortunately it were the Germans in 1891 who introduced the first progressive income tax in the world. Until that time, in the world only knew flat tax. And the former communist countries are following the ideas of the capitalist theories of Friedrich von Hayek and Mises and have introduced a flat tax. So this is what we see today. And the same is in social security. The same is in labor market, as you said. the benchmarking is so important. OECD does this on a wider level. Europe could do much more on this. A lot of these ideas are there. We don't need this compromise always, the harmonization. We need a competition of ideas. We also need a competition between institutional ideas and social security structure, labor market, and all this. And then we see a best practice, what really are the results, and others can learn from them. So all the diversity in Europe could be a strength. At the moment, the diversity in Europe is rather to be seen as a fundamental weakness. And I think that we have to learn if we want to be successful. But on a very concrete thing, what we could use and what we need in Europe, I think, would be kind of a startup act, would be a legal environment which makes it easier for young people to start a business, to grow it fast, to hire people without running into a social chaos and a catastrophe in case they are not successful. I think we have to do this. We have to encourage young people. We have to have role models. I ask myself, why isn't this possible? We don't need another economic theory to understand the basic role of the entrepreneur in bringing about innovation as the basis for economic dynamism, as the basis for growth, as the basis for creating new jobs and for wealth, for income and employment and wealth. We all know this. If we can learn a lot, not only Adam Smith, Schumpeter, exactly 100 years ago, would be a news book about Schumpeter is called The Prophet, not The Profit. There was a publication who got it wrong. It said the profit of innovation, but he is the prophet of innovation. And I think this we can learn very much from them. We can learn a lot from a country like Israel. The real startup country in the world is Israel. You mentioned Russia, migrants, 600,000 Russians migrated there. This was one of the biggest boosts Israel had in the last 20 years. What is the result of this? Venture capital investment in the United States per capita of the population is about $100 per year. Venture capital investment per capita of the population in Israel is 250. Venture capital investment as a per capita investment per year in Europe is about 15 US. And in Eurozone is 5. And in China already is 3 to 4. Israel invests more in venture capital than Germany, France, and the UK together. 8.5 million people versus 180 on the other side. So there is so much to learn from the world if we want and if we are open for this. We don't need new theories for this. We just open our eyes, use our brain. The little bit we got from our education is sufficiently to find out that the world is in a much better shape, the world economy in the world, than it ever was in history. The world economy was never in a better shape than now. Europe may be not in the best shape of its history, but the world will go on. And as someone said, a Chinese friend said, don't worry about Greece. Greece is one point, I'm sorry, I love Greece, and I always have to say that, and I love to go there. But the Greece economy is 1.7% of EU GDP, but 3.4, 3.5% of EU debt. And the Chinese friend said to me, don't worry. After all, in GDP terms, we are creating another Greece every 7 months. So if the whole economy would disappear, it wouldn't be even a hiccup in the statistics of the world economy. What I'm saying with this is there's no reason to be pessimistic. We don't need new theories. We have a lot of good experience. But at the moment, I have sometimes the feeling Europe maybe is not the best place to make money, but it's a great place to spend money.
Okay. Mr. Castronovo, what will the innovations in automotive industry bring us in the future? Are we going to have, let's say, low-emission night rider cars, or?
Well, we have a clear vision for the next 20 years. Cars, or anything that has wheels and a shell around, will stay a mandatory instrument for personal mobility. in the next 20 years. Now, will it be the only thing? Maybe not. And that is why we are investing not only in different combustion engines, more efficient engines, that work on electric power, but as well in different mobility services. Anything that has to deal with mobility, our group is preparing the future in order to be the leading provider of this premium mobility services. The example of the venture capital we started in the United States is one. The fact that we are putting into our cars more and more features concerning connected drive, infomobility, and connectivity with the cars, with the route systems, with safety, that is a sign. So I would say we would not take out from our cars the driving pleasure. We would definitely add more and more safety, and definitely add more and more infotainment, because people nowadays will be bound to stay in and around something called a car for anywhere between 1.5 to 3 hours per day, and that's quite a substantial amount of time.
Well, Mr. Mulford, what will bring us on the software field?
Well, the major progress in the software is cloud computing, and cloud computing for the knowledge society is what electricity was for industrial society. Because it's driving, and especially relative to 3 challenges I said: depth, demography, and drive for the growth. It will drive productivity, savings, and innovation, because it's a new model. You pay basically ICT will become utility. You don't pay for capacity of that solution, but you pay for the usage, right? And that's a huge, change. And relative to what Peter said about the startups, I think this is a unique chance for the European startups, because today in the traditional solutions, you need to have very high upfront, cost, very high upfront investment, while the cloud solution is, growing with you. So I'm optimistic, but still we need to move fast, and we need to have faster decision-making process in Europe, because China, and I'm not saying the Chinese are doing always good decisions, but they decide like that, okay? While we in Europe, we talk, and it's decision-making process in this, era when the information is doubling every second year. It's, key. And the last point, obviously, with the relative to the education, I think similar as in Korea, this needs to be European mantra, and everybody needs to take it as a biggest, priority, whether you are individual company or the state.
Thank you. With these future thoughts, we will close this panel. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to panelists. Tomorrow is, the forecast for tomorrow is great, so I hope you will enjoy Bled and this summer weather we have. Thank you. Good night.